Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here. We have a great evening planned for you. I'm Steve Zipperstein, Faculty Director of the Nazarian Center for Israel Studies here at UCLA. Thanks for joining us this evening for our program entitled Excavating, Tell Shaddud, Archaeology's Enduring Value for Understanding the Land and Its People. I want to begin by thanking our wonderful co-sponsors, the UCLA Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures, otherwise known as NELC, the UCLA Coates Institute for Archaeology, the UCLA Alan D. Levy Center for Jewish Studies. Director is here. Thank you so much for co-sponsoring your own talk. And the UCLA Center for Middle East Development, otherwise known as CMED. I want to thank Professor Bill Schniedewind for his willingness to present his amazing work at Tell Shaddud to us this evening. Some of you may not be aware that Professor Schniedewind, in addition to all of his academic work, running the Levy Center for Jewish Studies, is also a member of the Faculty Advisory Board of the Nazarian Center for Israel Studies. And I want to publicly thank Professor Schniedewind, who has been incredibly helpful to me, a mentor, and really just a great advisor since I became director last summer. I also want to thank Professor Aaron Burke for his willingness to moderate Professor Schniedewind's talk this evening. I'll introduce Professor Burke in a second. He'll then introduce Professor Schniedewind. He'll run the Q&A afterwards. So this is my last chance to talk to you. Before I sit down, I want to first thank our wonderful staff here at the Nazarian Center. Gage Greenspan on tech, Jane Matusovskaya, who you can thank for all the food, Maura Resnick. They're incredible, and I'm so grateful to them for everything they do. Now on to Professor Aaron Burke, Professor of the Archaeology of Ancient Israel and the Levant, either way. He holds the Kershaw Chair of Ancient Eastern Mediterranean Studies in the NELC department here at UCLA. He's a member of the Coates Institute of Archaeology. His PhD in Near Eastern Archaeology was awarded in 2004 by the University of Chicago. And since 1994, so 10 years before even obtaining his PhD, earning his PhD, Professor Burke excavated at sites in Israel, Egypt, Turkey. He traveled extensively in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Cyprus, Greece, and Italy. Wrote his PhD dissertation, I just heard, in Egypt partly, and collaborated in field research in Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Tel Dan, all in Israel. Wow. Now, Professor Burke has directed the Jaffa Cultural Heritage Project since 2007 and has co-edited 3 volumes resulting from his research there. In 2017, he expanded on the research and inaugurated Turning Points, an initiative aimed, and this is really important in my personal opinion, an initiative aimed at exploring the context out of which ancient Israel emerged from during the early Iron Age, some 3,000 to 3,200 years ago. Very, very important historical research and archaeological research. Professor Burke has written many books. I won't name them all for you. He's also the series editor for Elements in the Archaeology of Ancient Israel at Cambridge University Press. Professor Burke, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And I really want to thank Stephen for advancing a vision of a full-bodied study of Israel's past and present, and one that recognizes the role that archaeology can play in that discourse. I also want to thank Michael Cooperson as chair of the Near Eastern Language and Culture Department, Jason De Leon as director of the Coates Institute, and of course, Bill from the Alan D. Levy Center for Jewish Studies for supporting today's talk. Steve has asked me to introduce today's talk by Bill Schniedewind, my colleague, and to frame Steve's efforts as part of the broader Israel Studies Center here, the Nazarian Center, by recounting a little bit about archaeology at UCLA and the role that archaeology has played in the study of Israel. And so if you'll bear with me for 5 to 7 minutes as I lead up to an introduction, which I think sets the stage for Bill's own work and his contributions to that effort, then it'll give a good chance to frame today's talk and some of the future talks that we may have here at the Nazarian Center. I want to begin by addressing the elephant in the room that is perhaps all too familiar to those of us who work in the field of archaeology today, As a social scientific method for understanding the human past, archaeology is rooted in classical humanistic interests. Although it has been besieged in some quarters as an extension of the quote-unquote museum project or having status interests, the truth is that archaeology itself does not take sides, even if some of its practitioners sometimes do. This might be an unpopular concept in our present moment, but if archaeology is to be identified as a legitimate tool for understanding past human societies, then like linguistics, biology, or geography, it must make possible our consideration of evidence from a sometimes neglected quarter that must be taken up in free academic and public discourse. Few places in the world embody a robust discourse that archaeology can engender, as has occurred in Israel. Archaeology in Israel has made profound contributions to our study of human society. From the study of early hominids to the debates surrounding the settlement landscape in the Ottoman period, at every turn it has continued to illuminate the relationship of the region's inhabitants to their neighbors and the recognition of its multicultural and diverse social mosaic. As everywhere, Israel has experienced conflict, but also periods of harmony and community, which are all too easily forgotten and that do not make headlines. Over the course of tens of thousands of years, most of these human narratives fall in the domain of archaeology to expose, as the vicissitudes of history mean that our written accounts are far too few and most often simply do not exist for many periods and contexts. But even when we possess written sources, robust debates are created because of the witness of archaeology, which gives voice to the voiceless and alternative perspectives to challenge reigning orthodoxies. Again, almost nowhere else and at no other point in human history has this played out as intensively as it has in Israel over the past 3/4 of a century. But archaeology, be it in Israel or anywhere else, is not simply a handmaiden of a historical exercise or a tool for a study of identity. Today, archaeology is an exceedingly diverse discipline, and again, nowhere in the world has rivaled Israel's contribution in this regard. Let me underscore this by simply listing some of the examples of fields to which it has contributed, and in so doing, to underscore how inextricable archaeology is to many other modern disciplines and concerns that have, of course, been the domain of the Nazarian Center. Education, urban planning, transportation development, agriculture, horticulture, viticulture, land management, hydrology, environmental conservation, biology, the bigger climate change question, physics and mathematics. You can ask me afterwards what I mean. And recreation, to name but a few of the prominent examples. My point is simple but important. Archaeology is exactly the type of discipline the Academy needs more than ever, as it seeks to confront academic orthodoxies and revive rigorous and free discourse of important, if sometimes difficult, subjects. Over more than 20 years now, UCLA has made its own mark in the archaeology of Israel. And as will become evident, also through the unique contribution of our speaker. I began my own career here at UCLA as an archaeologist in ancient Israel and Levant in 2005. In 2007, we launched the Jaffa Cultural Heritage Project, a multidisciplinary effort to understand the archaeology and history of the city and environs of Jaffa, of which, of course, Tel Aviv is relatively modern, 1909. In its foundations. And in fact, we celebrated that in 2009 while we were actually working. For a decade, in collaboration with the Israel Antiquities Authority and under the watchful eye of the old Jaffa Development Corporation, we conducted excavations on the mound that represents nearly 4,000 years of continuous habitation in Jaffa. Mm-hmm. Numerous graduate students who now hold positions at leading research universities from Harvard to the University of Illinois worked to document the finds from earlier excavations at the site that we were charged with excavating and publishing, which was made possible through the support of various entities, including the International Institute, I might add, and from outside, NEH in particular. To date, the project has published, as Steve noted, 2 volumes with the Cookson Institute of Archaeology Press on the history and archaeology of Jaffa, embodying a broad cultural heritage approach to the site's history, which is taken as its starting point as a sort of palimpsest, if you will, that no part of Jaffa's history can be addressed independent of its consideration of another. And I can give you examples afterwards if you want to talk about that. As the project moves towards final publication in one last excavation report, it continues to make unique contributions to our understanding that reach far beyond the site itself. Our radiocarbon initiative, for example, derived dates for the destruction of Jaffa's New Kingdom Egyptian fortress that stand as nothing short of being a proxy for the end of Egyptian empire in Canaan. Those dates alone from the destruction that we excavated in 2013. And we can also speak of the analysis of one of the earliest Canaanite inscriptions that was conducted by our speaker and his graduate student, Matthew Soriano, who is now professor in Jewish studies at the University of Maryland. After Jaffa, our fieldwork moved on to Tel Dan, as Stephen mentioned, near the border with Lebanon in 2018, where UCLA graduate students, some of whom are sitting here today, labored on both sides of the pandemic to expose habitation relating to the crucible moment in the emergence of ancient Israel during the early Iron Age. Not within the confines of a bustling city like Jaffa, but ensconced within a national park at the foot of Mount Hermon, which, I think I prefer to the noisy confines of town, but nonetheless. Alongside these fieldwork efforts, graduate students of our program, with interests cultivated in the archaeology of Israel and supported by UCLA, have made important contributions at numerous other sites in Israel that read like the greatest archaeological hits of Israel. This is from the 2000s. Hatzor, Megiddo, Kaysan, Kayaffa, Azekah, Tel Burna, and Jerusalem. They have also taken what they have learned in Israel to their own work in countries throughout the region beyond Israel, to Tunisia, Jordan, Cyprus, Iraqi Kurdistan. Most recently, one of the students is sitting in the room who was there last year, and Spain 2 years ago. So the list is quite impressive. That's a long introduction, but I hope that will help usefully frame today's talk. William Schniedewind is professor of biblical studies and Northwest Semitic languages in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Culture. Bill served for more than 17 years as chair of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Culture, if my math is correct, Bill, in at least 2 episodes. His efforts not only established the position that I now inhabit, so his support of the archaeology of Israel being very evident, but also led to the recruitment of many other of our colleagues in ancient Near Eastern studies and Jewish studies. Most recently, he serves as the Sadie and Ludwig Kahn Director for the Alan D. Levy Center for Jewish Studies here at UCLA. Bill's career has embodied the integration of the study of geography and archaeology of ancient Israel with the study of the Hebrew Bible. His many PhD students have gone on to positions at Johns Hopkins, Princeton, the universities of Maryland and Iowa, Emory, and many others. Attracting the interest of the late Norma Kershaw, a patroness of the archaeology of Israel who lived in the OC, he went on to be the inaugural Kershaw Chair of Ancient Eastern Mediterranean Studies, and his work with Norma Kershaw also led to the establishment of a bequest for the Kershaw Postdoctoral Fellowship, which we are happy to announce has just matriculated, if that's the appropriate term for such a thing, its first holder, Aaron Hall. Aaron, would you raise your hand? Aaron Hall is joining us. A graduate of Tel Aviv University. So this is Bill's legacy through his efforts here. I could go on to mention the many books and articles that Bill has written on the history of the writing of the Hebrew Bible that engage archaeology as a crucial data source, like Who Really Wrote the Bible, The Story of the Scribes, Princeton 2024, buy it now on Amazon. But my introduction has been too long already. So without further ado, please help me welcome Bill as he presents gleanings from his most recent archaeological endeavor, Excavating Tell Shaddud.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for that great introduction. I'm really excited about this talk today. I'm really excited about the future of archaeology at UCLA and the importance of archaeology for contributing not only our understanding of ancient Israelite society, but modern human society as well. But before I begin, I just want to thank people again. I have deep gratitude to the institutions and people who make this work possible. Archaeology is never the achievement of a single individual. It's sustained by communities, by institutions who are committed to the humanities and the social sciences and the shared belief that the past matters for understanding who we are today. At UCLA, archaeology stands at the intersection of humanistic and scientific discovery. It brings together texts, landscapes, material culture, human experience in ways that few disciplines can. And this project reflects UCLA's commitment to the humanities and the social sciences as a space where history, culture, language, and meaning are not only preserved, but actively re-examined and reimagined. I'm especially grateful to the L&D Legacy Center for Jewish Studies and its supporters, Lev Ginsburg, for example, who sponsored UCLA's participation at Tell Shaddud last year, the Levy family, our Dean of Humanities, Alex Stern, as well as the Nazarian Center itself, which sponsored some students in Archaeology of Israel last summer as well. This support affirms that archaeology is central to Jewish studies and to the land of Israel studies. All right. With all that, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at this new excavation. Today's lecture is about one such important place, a small tell with big stories called Tell Shaddud. More broadly, it's about why archaeology still matters for the humanities, for the social sciences, for the Jewish studies, and especially for understanding the land of Israel. Started excavating at Tell Shaddud in 2023, and here I am with my co-directors, Professor Omer Sergi from Tel Aviv University and Dr. Karen Cavello-Paran from the Israel Antiquities Authority. I am the Associate Director and Epigrapher at the site of Tell Shaddud. And this was our team in 2023. It was a small team and a pilot season. So in some ways, we haven't done a lot at Tell Shaddud yet. So I'm going to give you just like the hors d'oeuvre of what's happening, but there's a lot of little finds that make the site really exciting for us. And here we are. This is very interesting. 2023 was before October 7th. It was an interesting time. I included in this picture not just us excavating and our directors sort of explaining things, but also that in that first season, it illustrates one of the reasons why I think it's important to bring students and people to the land of Israel, which is you're interacting with actual people. So one of the major events that were going on were protests all over Israel in 2023 about judicial matters in the state. And after every day's excavation, members of the team were running out to these protests all over the country. You were, running around with the people, actual people, and getting to know Israelis and the culture and the land every single day. So it's not just, I'm digging there. You're actually getting to know the land and the people when you're working there, and you're spending time. 2024 is a blank slide because they canceled our excavations because of things that were happening in Lebanon. My plane ticket to Israel was canceled the day before I was leaving. And 2025 didn't look too good either. We ended up having to shorten our season, but I'm really thankful. UCLA was incredibly supportive in allowing us to go even after the events that were happening in Iran, and which had forced us to shorten our season. But we wanted to continue the work forward, and we had a small group of people, including only 2 UCLA students were able to come because of the shortened season, supported by the Nazarian Center, by the Levy Center, by the Nelk Department, and these are some of our staff in that area. Crystal's actually in the room, one of our students, and Josh was the other undergraduate student in the excavation last summer. Okay. Israel, Tell Shaddud, where is it located? It's located right next to its namesake, which is Kibbutz Sarid. One of the things we're doing there is not just archaeology, but we're also doing community outreach. We're trying to get together with, students and people from throughout the country who are coming sometimes as volunteers for a day or two to the site of Shaddud. So community outreach is an important part of what we're trying to do. It's also public archaeology. Here's me, and I'm giving a TV interview. This is in the summer of 2023. These are our t-shirts for our first 2 seasons at Tell Shaddud. Okay, let me begin with kind of a general discussion of why archaeology is important from my perspective. Why archaeology and why Shaddud? Well, there are a variety of different things. One, archaeology answers question or gives us new data for understanding ancient Jewish civilization in the land. It also gives us new data for understanding the history of Middle Eastern cultures. And it also gives us understanding of history and role of writing in human society, which as an epigrapher is something really important to me. And I want to give you two examples of this today as sort of an hors d'oeuvre into this. And one, I'm going to talk about the example of Isaiah the prophet, a seal impression that was excavated in Jerusalem. And then more generally, female scribes in the archaeological record, which I'm talking about in my most recent book. I also want to talk about, why archaeology is important from the view of an epigrapher. And here I'll just kind of name drop my own books and works. This is an edited book I did on the El Marna correspondence. These are letters written from the Pharaoh, from different rulers in Israel, including, the city of Jerusalem, to Egypt in the late Bronze Age or in the late second millennium BC. There's also inscriptions. Professor Burke talked about one of the earliest alphabetic inscriptions that we excavated that he is publishing from Jaffa. Here's an article I wrote on the alphabetic scribe at Lachish. One of the reasons this is kind of an interesting one is because this particular ostracon, fragmentary though it is, mixes Egyptian writing and alphabetic writing in the same inscription. And it reflects this transitional period between the New Kingdom Egypt and the development of early Israel that is so interesting, some of the work that Professor Burke has been doing, and to what I want to do and what I'm interested at Tell Shaddud. I've also written a number of books that are incorporated this. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's a book called Social History of Hebrew where I'm using inscriptions and archaeology to give the history of Hebrew a context. I wrote a book called The Finger of the Scribe about how scribes learned to write the Bible, and this is again built on archaeology and epigraphy. And then the book that Professor Burke mentioned, this is kind of a shameless plug for who really wrote the Bible, The Story of the Scribes. And I want to talk about an example from that book to let you see how archaeology fills in contexts that we can't get without it. And this is one of the more groundbreaking recent discoveries, and this is the bulla or seal impression of Isaiah the prophet. And there's a famous article in Biblical Archaeology Review called "Is this Prophet Isaiah's signature?" ? Because there was a lot of debate about it. I wrote an article. It's a development of something I talked about in my book, trying to prove that this is indeed the signature of the prophet Isaiah. But part of it, proving this, is the archaeological context, which often gets lost in from epigraphers who read inscriptions as though they were found in some sealed hermeneutic place. But they're found in real places, and the physical context matter. In this case, the seal impression was found in a place called the Ophel, just south of the Temple Mount in the city of Jerusalem. And the Ophel is really interesting. There was this massive gate complex that was found right here. You can see it right here, highlighted in red. Among the things that they found in the gate complex in the Ophel excavations were 34 seal impressions, not just the Isaiah seal, but 33 other seal impressions. And that's the gate complex, the entire Ophel, and the other seal impressions are all part of the archaeological context of understanding the seal of Isaiah. And here's an artist's reconstruction of what this gate complex might have looked like. It's a massive gate into a royal administrative area of the city of Jerusalem, I think. You can tell this from some of the seal impressions. Like, not only did they find the seal impression of Isaiah, but they found a seal impression belonging to Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Judah. The king of Judah, right? 10 feet away from the seal impression of Isaiah the prophet. They also found, and of course we know about, these two essentially being in cahoots together. If we read the scriptures, there's this one arbitrary text I gave you, where King Hezekiah heard it, he tore his clothes, and what does he do? He sends for Eliakim, who was in charge of the palace, and Shebna, the secretary, and the senior priests, and they were covered with sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amoz, right? So the two of them are working together. Now, one of the things I would say about this, and the importance of the seal impression of Isaiah, is it's not because I want to prove that Isaiah was a historical person. I'm not interested. I mean, I know Isaiah was historical. We don't really need any information to know that. It's to understand what he was doing, what prophecy was about, and the prophetic office were about, and this archaeological context is going to give us information that way. Now, this is unpublished. This is published, but my interpretation is unpublished. This is a seal impression that was found. This is one of the 34 seal impressions. This is, I believe, the seal impression of, I think, probably Manasseh or one of the other sons of Hezekiah. You can tell by the little piece right here, which has to be the royal symbol of the house of Judah in the time of Hezekiah, and you see it in the Hezekiah seal, and it's broken. And then there are a few letters that I'm reconstructing. Not sure about the reconstruction, but it gives you some more context of the kind of things that were found in this area. But then, of course, we have our seal impression of Isaiah, and some scholars would say, the seal's broken. Maybe this is the wrong reading. Maybe there were a lot of Isaiahs running around in Jerusalem at this time. It could have been any Isaiah. And but then if you look at the archaeological record, there are actually no other Isaiahs. Now, in the antiquities market, we have dozens of seal impressions with the name Isaiah in the antiquities market. But before this excavation, they had never excavated a single inscription that had the name Isaiah on it. Not one. I mean, there were dozens and dozens in the antiquities market, but not one in a single seal, in an excavated thing. So you go to the city of Jerusalem and the city of David, okay, they have a cache of 85, seal impressions in one area with personal names. The Isaiah, name Isaiah never appears, okay? So as a control, when you look around, no, that's not true. Isaiah had never, ever appeared in an inscription until we found this. And we found it 10 feet away from a seal of Hezekiah and other seals of significance. Now, what makes it really even more interesting is that in the same cache, they didn't find one Isaiah seal impression, they actually found two. Because they found this one on the bottom, which I would translate belonging to Idoyahu, the son of Isaiah. So it's not from Isaiah himself, it's the son of Isaiah, right? I don't know whether this is an apprentice of Isaiah or whether it's the actual son of Isaiah, but it's pretty clear that this seal impression is related to the other seal impression, and I talk about it in great detail in my book, so I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but the way, I was able to sort of reconstruct this whole thing was really based on reading archaeology and the general context. You can't read anything in isolation. Everything has a context, and archaeology is the critical context for the Hebrew Bible, for ancient other ancient Jewish texts, and for inscriptions like these inscriptions. And of course, here's another passage that reflects on this idea that Isaiah had disciples. So this tells me something about the formation of the book of Isaiah. It says Isaiah is commanding his disciples, bind up the testimony, seal the teaching. This is a seal, right? Seal the teaching among my disciples. See, I and the children. He calls the disciples, the people who are essentially his apprentices working with him, his children. And you get this kind of fictive kinship group, which isn't unlike like a doctoral studies, right? So I'm supposedly a doctor father, right? To my students. So it's because you have a small apprenticeship kind of learning kind of thing that we learn from studying archaeology and anthropology. Okay, let me give you one more example that's related to this. Now I'm moving out. Now I'm trying to re-understand the title of prophet, and how it might have been used in ancient Israel. And lo and behold, at a place called Lachish, they found 2 seal impressions stamped from the same seal that read, belonging to Jeremiah, the son of Zephaniah, the son of the prophet, or the son of a prophet, right? Here it looks like son of a prophet is a title of this particular figure. I would say it's not a very nice seal impression, so that's because he's not the prophet, he's the son of a prophet. So he gets a secondary quality of his seal impression. And some scholars would say, well, maybe that should be read different. Maybe it's the son of, Nobai or something else. Then maybe it's a personal name. But as soon as you look at the archaeological context, I think you get something different. What's the context? These 2 seal impressions were found in archaeological locus in a jar with 17 other seal impressions, or bullae, right? 3 of the bullae had official titles in that collection, including royal steward, son of the servant of the king, son of the king. It was found in the same archaeological locus as a letter or an administrative text known as Lachish 22, which is just a list of officials. It's also found in the same archaeological context as inscribed weights. So you get the impression that, this is again an administrative context, right? And suddenly it looks like this title of prophet in ancient Israel was related to administrative contexts. And that brings me to one of the things I also think is really interesting and poorly understood, and that is another prophet who's living just a little bit after Isaiah, and that is the prophet Huldah. This is a woman who had a major role, I think, in the composition of some biblical literature. Here she's mentioned in 2 Kings 22. So the priest Hilkiah, Ahikam, Achbor, Shaphan, Asiyah went to the prophet Huldah, the wife of Shalom, the son of Tikah, the keeper of the wardrobe. She resided in Jerusalem in the 2nd quarter where they consulted her. She declared to them, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, and so on. So she's a major figure in biblical literature. We actually know about wives of figures from archaeological excavations and inscriptions. So this is a Astrakhan known as the wife of Astrakhan, excavated in Jerusalem. It dates to about 600 BC. This is my drawing of it. And, it's some sort of administrative list of which the wife of different figures is mentioned throughout the list. So this is fits really nicely with this description of Huldah in the biblical text as the wife of Shalom. But we also, the other thing that's really interesting about this is the place. She resided in Jerusalem in the 2nd quarter, or the Mishneh, and there's a lot of discussion about where this place is. And here's an artist's reconstruction of what the city of Jerusalem might have looked like in this historical time period. And I'm very interested in this area right here, which I think might be the 2nd quarter, for reasons that, I'll explain. This is the area which now, today in Jerusalem, is the Gavati parking lot excavations. You see them down here. They have some really nice buildings. This is a artist's reconstruction of an elite dwelling in this area. And in this area, we not only find, elite dwellings, but a number of inscriptions. So for example, since we're talking about women, one of the inscriptions they found is a seal belonging to Haganah, the daughter of Gael. Like people say, oh, there weren't women who wrote in ancient Israel. No, there's actually more evidence for writing among women than we think there is. So Huldah fits nicely. It works really well. There's also a really nice inscription that was found in this area belonging to Natan Melech, the servant of the king. And this person is actually a person that's mentioned in the biblical text. And in the same story, a chapter later, it talks about this guy at the entrance of the temple area by the chamber of Natan Melech, which was in the precincts. So we have historical figures, and we have the beginnings of, I think, understanding a context for this person, Huldah, who seems to play a major role in biblical literature. So archaeology helps turn the prophet from a literary figure, I would say, into a lived profession in ancient Israel. Archaeology lets us see the prophets like Huldah or Isaiah not in isolation, but in real places and institutions. That brings us directly to why I'm interested in Tell Shaddud, which stands at strategic crossroads and deserves our attention. So I'm going to turn our attention to Tell Shaddud here and talk why I'm interested in this site. There are two parts of what I want to do. I want to talk briefly about, exploring Tell Shaddud, why we went there, essentially. Why is this site interesting? And then the second part of the story, I want to talk about the story of Tell Shaddud, what we know so far, and we only have 2 short seasons of small, limited people, so we're only beginning to see the story of the New Kingdom, Egypt and early imperialism, the beginnings of the Israelite state, maybe a neo-Assyrian, colonial fortress at the end of the Iron Age monarchy, evidence of Jewish resistance under Roman imperialism during the late Second Temple period, and its continuing strategic importance in the 20th century. So where is this site, Shaddud? Shaddud is most likely the biblical site of Sarid. Sarid was a border town in Zebulun in the Jezreel Valley that we know about. It's probably also mentioned in the book of Judges in the Song of Deborah, and we'll look at those. Tell Shaddud fits nicely along in the geography and the description of the Jezreel Valley that we know from the book of Joshua. It controls the main road crossing the valley from Megiddo northward and lies on the route from Akko to Bet Shan, as we'll see. So it's an ideal border marker and strategic town. And that sort of explains probably why it ends up in the border list of Joshua. And then there's a name continuity. The word Shaddud and Sarid are etymologically related. So it seems to work out also from the continuing name. So here's our passage in the book of Joshua in where Sarid is mentioned in the territorial list, assigning the land to Zebulun. Third lot came up to the tribe of Zebulun. The border went as far as Sarid. The border went to Maralah, and so on and so forth. It's in the general area of Shaddud, so it fits really well here. And then, in an article by Nadav Naaman, professor at Tel Aviv University, who wrote literary and topographical notes on the Battle of Kishon, he identified the Hebrew word Sarid there as a place name instead of a verb, as it was usually taken. And I think he's right. Of course, the excavations might help some more, but the book of Judges and the Song of Deborah is really important to the site because it reflects the strategic importance of Sarid and the Jezreel Valley in the history of the Middle East more generally. Okay, so that's sort of the biblical backgrounds. Then there's salvage archaeology. Now, what's salvage archaeology? Salvage archaeology is actually why we're there, at Sarid in some ways. Because there's this road, you see it on the top right here, or my top left, my top right, your top left. And then down where the star is marked, they found a tomb when they were widening the road. And what did they find in the tomb? They found this. This is an anthropoid coffin from the Egyptian New Kingdom, an Egyptian New Kingdom cemetery. And actually, they couldn't extend the salvage excavations too far, but they had evidence that there were more anthropoid coffins in there. There was just one that we were able to recover. And we know about these types of coffins. Here's an exhibit from the Israel Museum. They're found at Egyptian New Kingdom strongholds. So that's late Second Temple or late Second Millennium sites like Deir el-Bala, Bet Shan, now at Tell Shaddud. So that gave us the inkling that there may be some sort of Egyptian fortress or imperial presence here from the New Kingdom period, from sort of the very early part of ancient Israel. We also found an Egyptian scarab in the salvage excavations there. So what do you do next? Next, you survey the site. And so they go to the Tell and the area around the Tell, and they start taking surveys of what different places things are represented. You know, there's Roman, there's early EB or early bronze, there's middle bronze, so 3rd millennium, 2nd millennium, late bronze, the late 2nd millennium. This is the New Kingdom period of Egypt, and our anthropoid coffins. And then, of course, the Iron Age was around almost 25%. So that's, of course, one of the things I'm interested in. But there's also Roman, Hellenistic. This is a site that has continual occupation. And on the top of the Tell, on the very top, it was primarily late bronze, Iron Age, middle bronze, and a little and Roman. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about like where this place is. This is where Tell Shaddud is. This is the Jezreel Valley. I kind of outlined it in green. It's on the northern part of the Jezreel Valley in northern Israel. It's across the valley from the site of Megiddo. And the site of Megiddo is the most important, ancient biblical site in some ways. The one of, I would say, fame, right? As we'll see. Yeah. So, and one of the problems of the Jezreel Valley that's reflected in the Song of Deborah is that it tends to get really muddy because you see it's surrounded on all sides by mountains, and so everything drains into the valley, right? But as it happens, we have this basaltic uplifted center part of the valley where it's dry usually, and it's where you can cross the valley easily, and that place sort of takes you directly from Sarid to Megiddo. So you're going from one of the great sites of ancient of the ancient Near East to Sarid. And when you stand on top of Sarid, you have this panoramic view of the Jezreel Valley. So here are some views, just looking from, this is taken from the top of the Jezreel of Tell Shaddud, looking across to the south. You can see there's Mount Tabor just off to the left, there's the Hill of Moreh, there's Mount Gilboa, there's Megiddo right here. The whole valley from Mount Carmel to Mount Gilboa to all these places is just there right in front of you. One of the most panoramic, beautiful views on that you'll see at 5 o'clock in the morning when you're starting your excavation there. And it also reminds us of one of the iconic texts in biblical literature in the New Testament where we're reminded of the strategic location. And this is the reference to Armageddon. Then they gathered the kings of the whole world to assemble for battle on the great day of God Almighty to the place in Hebrew called Armageddon, which is Har Hill of Megiddo, right? So that's sort of like a hint at the strategic location, right? So you're going across from Megiddo, but you're coming south from Egypt, right? and you're moving north to Mesopotamia, and Sarid is at the crossroads. And then you start on the coast, Akko, Haifa area today, and then you go to Bet Shan, and then Transjordan, and so Sarid and Megiddo are at this crossroads, strategic crossroads in the Jezreel Valley. And so you get, stories in the biblical literature about great battles, beginning with, of course, the Song of Deborah, which is so important to Sarid and to our history. But it's one of the things I want to emphasize is that it's not just ancient history. The strategic importance is up till today. So here's me and Mark Meyer, who's writing his thesis at Tel Aviv University on British military colonialism in Israel-Palestine in relation to early Zionism in the Jezreel Valley. And his archaeological context is the site of Sarid, partly because on the top of the site, and these are aerial photos from the early 20th century, you can see the British Mandate military trenches on the top. So like we're digging through, of course we're looking for New Kingdom Egypt or early Israel or Jewish village in the Roman period, but we're also dealing with military trenches of the British period, of the modern period, Haganah during the War of Independence. And Mark is working on that particular problem at the place of Shaddud. So the issues of antiquity and the issues of the modern state are inextricably tied together because the geography and the issues are fundamentally the same. This also goes to the agricultural aspects of Sarid. The Jezreel Valley, Jezreel literally means God sows. And what you have in this green area right here is a huge agricultural area. And here I'm with my student, Crystal. Not only am I bringing students there, but I want them to see the broader context of what we're doing, right? And understand the logistics. So here we're at Tel Jezreel on the southern part of the valley, looking north to Jezreel, to Sarid or Tel Shaddud on the other side of the valley, right? And here's the another site that's close, really important site called Horvat Tevet that was excavated by the two directors of the site, Professor Sergi and Dr. Cavello Pravan. You see it right here, about 8 miles from Tel Shaddud, and they excavated this enormous agricultural administrative site. There you can see some of the buildings. Here's the particular building you're looking at there, and in these buildings they found large amounts of different types of storage jars, the hippo jars, the whole mouth jars. These are really important because they're obviously important for cattle, sheep and goats, grain. All the evidence for all these things are being found in these in the faunal remains of these jars. And these whole mouth jars, which are so typical of storage and administrative sites, we begin to find them at Tel Shaddud. We haven't found any whole ones, but we're finding the pottery pieces, in significant numbers at Tel Shaddud in our excavations of the Iron 2A period. So there's a lot of expectation that when we are able to excavate more broadly in a full season, that this is a clue that we are going to be looking at an early Israelite administrative site. It's also sort of important here to contextualize it. This is kibbutz Sarid that you see right next to Tel Shaddud. Kibbutz Sarid is a modern agricultural kibbutz. Agriculture has anchored human life in the Jezreel Valley for millennia until this very day. And Shaddud's ancient farmers cultivated the same fertile soils that support Kibbutz Sarid's modern fields today. And the valley's long-standing pattern small agrarian communities are clustered around the edges of the Jezreel Valley. Sarid thus becomes a contemporary expression of the valley, the Jezreel Valley's enduring agricultural geography, linking ancient pathways to modern day land use. That's so typical. Okay, now I'm going to pick a fur. So one of the things I'm hoping to find at Sarid or Tell Shaddud is inscriptions. And we know about writing, especially in this area in the late second millennium. We have linear alphabetic inscriptions. This is early Hebrew alphabet that emerges in the late second millennium BC. We have a text called the Amarna letters that are written in a local cuneiform language, local Akkadian. And we also have alphabetic cuneiform that I'll talk about in a second. So this is one of the Amarna letters. There are 350 or 380 of these letters from Egypt, mostly diplomatic letters from Pharaoh to the Pharaoh from rulers in Canaan in the 14th century. They famously mention the Habiru, which is often connected to the Hebrews. It's an interesting problem about the early origins of Israel. The site is also mentioned in the campaigns of Thutmose III. He says, he talks about capturing Megiddo is like capturing 1,000 cities. But he also had in his lists, administrative lists of this area after he's captured, he mentions Sarid in his topographical lists. So we have nice, sort of early mentions and early indications of the relationship between Megiddo and Sarid that are hinted about in the Amarna letters. And when we look at the Amarna letters, a lot of these Amarna letters are written in places all around. So Sarid's in the middle. There's Shimron, Yokneam, Megiddo, Bet-Shan, Tanakh, Akko, Reho. So there's a good hope, that Sarid might offer us, or Tell Shaddud might offer us some cuneiform texts. We also have very interesting taste of alphabetic cuneiform. This is the Ugaritic language. I'm actually teaching a seminar at UCLA right now on Ugaritic. This is a site in on the northern Syrian coast. But two alphabetic cuneiform tablets were found in just around Sarid, just to the south of Tanakh and just to the east in the area of Mount Tabor. And these are early alphabetic texts written in cuneiform, right? So not the cuneiform, regular cuneiform language, but a language that's related to early alphabetic Hebrew. And there's another text found in Israel called the Bet Shemesh text. This is actually just to the east of Jerusalem, or to the west of Jerusalem, Bet Shemesh is. But it's a school tablet with an ABCD. It has essentially the ABCs. And the interesting thing about this text is it's not a inscribed text, it's a mold text. In other words, they stamped it. That means they had a stamp and they stamped this ABCD, like your classroom ABCs on the top of it. They're stamping it. So it shows that alphabetic cuneiform was probably used more widely in Israel at the time that the Hebrew alphabet is emerging. So this is like on my wish list to find. I do have, evidence in the region of alphabetic cuneiform. So that's, all things that you hope you find. Now, what did we actually find? Here are our new excavations on the summit. In 2023, we started in Area A and Area B in small areas. And then in 2023, we noticed more keenly, and I'd like to take some credit for it, but I don't know if I can really do it, but that there's a lower shelf to the tell. And so we decided to explore the lower shelf to the Tell. This is our area C, and that we excavated in just the beginning in 2025. All right. So already, we've only had like a season and a half of relatively small things. We've already sort of confirmed our New Kingdom Egyptian presence. I mean, we found a couple more Egyptian scarabs. This one you see right here from the 2023 season. This dates, we think, to the LB3 or the 12th century BC, so it fits really well with what Professor Burke has done in his pioneering work at Jaffa in redating the end of the New Kingdom and looking at the transition into early Iron Age then being much more seamless. And then from the Iron Age 2A, we begin to see a major destruction of the site. You can see over here these burned red bricks. We find them, here in a highlight. And it's a massive destruction that brings the site to an end in the Iron 2A period, somewhere around 840 or 830 BC. We know about these destructions at lots of different sites. This is the Aramean king Hazael. He's got a nice carved ivory that we have from North Syria. And Tell Shaddud now can fit into these destructions of the Aramean king Hazael all around the Jezreel Valley, but also at the site that Professor Burke has been digging at Tel Dan. And here I'll give you eye candy of another destruction. The Tel Dan was probably destroyed and taken over by Hazael, and we know about it from the Tel Dan inscription, which I published about, and I'll just give you a little part of it. It was found in the gate area of Tel Dan, and it reads, "Now the king of Israel formerly entered my father's land, but Hadad made me," that is Hazael, king, "and went before me, and I killed 70 kings who harnessed thousands of chariots and horsemen, and I killed Jehoram, the son of Ahab, the king of Israel, and Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, the king of the house of David." Right? So this was a major find in the 90s when they found this inscription because it's the first mention of King David. But it's also interesting because the figure who seems to be claiming this is Hazael, who we have with these widespread destructions, and now including the site of Tell Shaddud. What else have we found? One of the really fun finds from this time period is from this last couple seasons are Iron Age 2 figurines. At this point, we have 3 different figurines that have been found in the brief excavations in area A, B, and C. Here's just one of the examples. This is the better one of the examples. They're all broken examples, but they're in every single area that we have from the excavation. They talk to this discussion about what was religion like in ancient Israel. Mm-hmm. And here I'll just remind you of a couple biblical texts, and I could go through a whole lecture on these figurines and understanding early Israelite religion. In 1 Kings, of course, we have the famous story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Therefore, all Israel assemble with me on Mount Carmel with the 400 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table, right? Or in the book of Deuteronomy, we know that ancient Israel was worshiping the goddess Asherah because it says you should not plant a tree as a sacred pole or Asherah beside the altar you make for the Lord your God. Now, you wouldn't say a prohibition unless it was actually happening, right? And the other evidence on the ground are in Hebrew inscriptions. Here's this one Hebrew inscription from, I didn't write it up there, Kuntilat Ajrud. I will bless you by God of Israel, right, of Samaria, and by his Asherah, right? So we know that, Asherah is being worshipped. We're seeing some of the evidence of this at Tell Shaddud, just sort of smatterings of this evidence. we also have evidence, I think, of early Iron II administration. And here is the fort where we think about the fort of the New Kingdom period might have been. And we notice that, there was this ledge here. And so we extended our excavation to our area C. And we started moving down the slope, trying to get a feel for what we might find there. And finally, in the last days of our excavation, in the final probe here, we found this. This is a clay plaque. It's really small. It's like, little. But it's very, very instructive, and again, an hors d'oeuvre of what we might find at this site. Because we know about this imagery from other places. This is from Tel Rehov. You see this image of, the circle here, and then the center kind of triangle. We also have it from Jerusalem. This is from 800 BC around in Jerusalem, the excavations in the city of David. You see again, these kind of wings, and then later around 700 BC, we begin finding in Jerusalem lots of these. And these are proto-Ionic capitals made out of limestone, monumental, administrative kind of evidence. And so this is will be one of the early examples. It's a unique find. We never found anything exactly like it in another place, but it's very kind of indicative of an administrative site from the early Iron IIA period, or somewhere around 900 BC or so. All right, and then I'm just going to close this up really quickly with there are things that we weren't really looking for. There are Roman period excavations, areas B and C. There's lots of domestic houses in area C where I was working. We're finding beautiful lamps, and here's Crystal again, and she's showing off one of the things I was really excited about. And these are stone fragments of stone vessels, and this is not something we were really expecting. In the late Second Temple period, many Jewish communities used stone vessels because stone was believed not to become ritually impure. So whenever you see a stone vessel in your archaeological excavation, it almost always points to a Jewish domestic or some sort of Jewish presence at the site in the Roman period. This is typical of Roman period, right? This practice is well attested archaeologically throughout the land of Israel. So the presence of the stone vessels here is taken as an indication of Jewish presence. We don't know the extent of it yet. So we know that there were a lot of Jewish villages in the area, and we weren't really expecting a Jewish village at Tell Shaddud, but it points to the continual presence of Jews in various parts of Israel, in the land of Israel, and this was really interesting. And of course, it reminds us of Roman imperialism. Like, if you want to talk about colonialism in the Middle East, I would say we should start with the Egyptians and the Romans, and then we can go to the Mamluks and the Iranian. But let's start, let's stick with the antiquity. Just across the valley, you can see it from Tell Shaddud, huge Roman fort, Legio, just across the valley. So you're looking at, from the top of Tell Shaddud, you're looking at one of the largest Roman forts of the late Second Temple period at Legio. Anyway, and so that's a good place to start. We're also, inviting you to come, study with us, learn with us at Tell Shaddud. The excavations will continue this summer and hopefully in more peaceful times, beginning July 12th until August 7th. As an epigrapher, I hope to find future inscriptions from Tell Shaddud that will help tell the story of the earliest alphabetic writing, of imperial power, and the interaction between foreign rule and local Jewish and Israelite administrations at Tell Shaddud. Thank you.
Thank you for that. a wonderful overview of a scintillating tell that offers many, many things to come. I'll maybe just ask a couple of questions and we'll open it up to the floor for other questions that people have. One thing that struck me towards the end of your talk here is you're talking about some of the material culture showing up, the stamped capital, this classic, been known as the proto-Aeolic or palmette because it's really a floral motif, but also the figurine, and placing both of them in the 9th century. What is the discussion around this intersection of this space with the Phoenicians? Because we're not far from the classic heartland of the Phoenicians, which already shows up in northern Israel. And of course, there's a territory that Solomon ceded, right, to the king of Tyre.
Yeah, I mean, at Shaddud in the early excavations, we haven't seen any direct evidence of Phoenician presence, although those figurines are, thought to be of Phoenician influence by a lot of scholars, and as well as the proto-Aeolic capital, often thought to be a Phoenician influence. In terms of the other material, like pottery, we're not seeing anything that's like identifiably Phoenician yet, but I would say we haven't excavated that much, so we're just like, we're beginning to see, or, hints of things, and we would expect Phoenician, it's a influence. The Phoenicians are a funny group of people. They're not imperialists. Like the Egyptians or the neo-Assyrians, they're going to go, we have evidence for a neo-Assyrian fort there. Very fragmentary evidence, but it seems pretty, I think it's probably pretty certain we're going to get a neo-Assyrian fort there too. The Phoenicians were traders, right? So they tended to stay more settled there. They would move as merchants, but they're not like, I don't see them as like settling inland and other places. I think they stayed along the coast. I think we might see some more evidence of Phoenicians at some point. You would expect that in the, by the end of the Iron 2A, but we haven't seen it yet. Other than, these figurines and proto capitals, you find them everywhere, right? So that's the Phoenician influence and reach, not physical presence of Phoenicians, right? So.
Okay. I guess the other observations are around the sort of early Iron Age transition, the role of the site and its importance to that development process. And on the one hand, we've had many conversations about the end of Egyptian empire and what did this look like. There you have at the foot of the tell this incredible burial. I don't know, you didn't mention the details of it, but they did DNA analysis of this person, confirmed. They weren't able to confirm much except to say that the person has definitely got the genomic structures of, local, but that local is a big local. It includes even the sort of Egyptian strands, which are all melded at that point. But they found also linen inside of it, so you have some evidence of the kind of clothing that Egyptians wore. So, and you mentioned, the Song of Deborah, the early reference to Sarid. What is the thinking around the project in terms of, what this particular site, given its size, its position, what kind of light it might shed on the early Iron Age process? Is there a particular?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really small site, in terms of sites. It's like, I'm looking at this room and I'm thinking it's about, maybe 6 to 8 times the size of this room.
It's bigger than that. But yeah,
okay, but it feels like, what I mean? But Professor Burke obviously has been there as well. It's a small site, but, it's a very strategic location. And we don't really know yet what the nature of the transition is from the New Kingdom, Egyptian. One of the things that you pioneered at Jaffa was how late the New Kingdom Egyptian colonial imperial presence lasted, and then when you talk about the early Israelite states beginning in the 11th century, instead of having this huge gap, it's more like I think that we're talking about a generation or two of like transitional chaos. And you wrote this really nice article called Left Behind, which talking about the legacies of the New Kingdom Egyptian imperialism on the development of the early state. And I wrote this book, The Finger of the Scribe, talking about the transition from, how scribes learned to write in the New Kingdom period to, the beginning of writing in the early Iron Age. So like our work is sort of
Absolutely.
is going together here. But the real question or the major problem, which is one of the reasons that you're working at Dan, and one of the reasons I'm interested in Sarid, is this very complicated and poorly understood transition between the New Kingdom, period when the Egyptian Empire essentially is dominating the region, to the emergence of new polities, Israel, Judah, and this isn't clear. Now, I'm of the opinion that it's a much tighter window of transition. I think my director, Omer Sergi, would probably think of there's a bigger gap. But this is this is an open question, I think, where these are the kinds of things that are poorly understood and archaeology can illuminate. Here's the subtext of this, and this is kind of unrelated, but one of the modern debates is about colonialism and modern colonialism. And sometimes the aspersions are cast of Israel as a colonial, but when I look at the Middle East, what I see is colonialism is the pattern of human society from as early as we know it. And it's not something new, and the ancient Israelites were not the colonial power, just like I don't see early, modern state of Israel as the colonial power of the Middle East. But I think it's really important to see the longue durée of colonialism, from at Tell Shaddud. It starts with the New Kingdom, then the neo-Assyrian. I think there's going to be a Persian fort. We don't have it yet, but there's going to be, I'm pretty sure. We see the Roman, imperialism all around. Then we get, the early Islamic states, none of which are indigenous. They're from Egypt, they're from Syria, they're from Damascus. Then they have the Crusaders, so imperialism. Then there's the Ottoman Empire, for centuries of imperialism. And imperialism is just what happens in this region to the people who are native to the region.
All right, let's open it up to questions from the audience. I'll repeat them since we don't have a mic that can travel. And
Isn't colonialism the history everywhere?
I think it is. It absolutely is. That's one of the things that I think is poorly articulated in modern discourse.
Right.
I have one question. I don't remember my numbers very well, but if the story of the Passover story of the enslavement of the Hebrews is in Egypt, is it and Egypt at the same time, however, is in the land of Canaan? How does that kind of work together?
Boy. Yeah, that's a big topic. So the question is how to reconcile the story of the Exodus, which is of course set in Egypt along the Nile, Egypt proper, the core of Egypt, when we have to remember that Canaan is under Egyptian control at this time. I invite you to take my course, Archaeology Identity. We spent an entire quarter trying to unpack that among many other things. I mean, you want to field that one?
I mean,
We got 5 minutes.
Yeah,
It's an interesting question.
It's a complicated question. I think archaeology has an interesting role to play in sort of fully understanding it, because there are a couple like wonderful books that are on both sides of this discussion. One is this work of Ron Hendel, who used to teach at Berkeley, he's retired now, who talks about the Exodus or the freedom from Egypt in the land, right? The Israelites were freed from Egypt here. They weren't just freed from Egypt in Egypt. And then Richard Elliott Friedman, in his new book on the Exodus, talks about a small group of people that came out of Egypt. I like to talk about, there's a passage in the Bible that talks about the mixed multitude of early Israel. That the Exodus is a complicated story, just like origin stories in general are complicated. And we kind of simplify them for, ritual use. But if you read the Bible carefully, it gives you I think it gives you all the tools to see the complicated nature of the quote unquote Exodus. There's the freedom from the Egyptians who are here in the land, and then there are people who came out of Egypt probably as well, and then there are people who are probably settling from coming from the wilderness into. There's a lot of different elements to the Exodus story that you can see in the Bible.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. The Passover story, creates a easy, digestible narrative that's important. It's important for Jewish identity, but the Bible gives us the complicated and nuanced story too. And archaeology helps us fill that in. We would have never understood, like Ron Hendel's archaeology, treatment of cultural memory. We would have never understood that and the text and been able to read the text in that way if we didn't have archaeology. Archaeology is the key to giving us a new way of looking at the text.
The other 2-minute version, it's funny, he's talking about the archaeology as the Hebrew Bible guy. I'll talk about the text now as the archaeologist. Is that basically, if you think about the oldest historical material that we have in the text or memories, it's the songs that are then elaborated into fuller length. So of course you have the song of Miriam, right? Departing. Mm-hmm. Read it again tonight. Look how simple it is and how little detail you're provided with. It's a song of liberation. It's a song of throwing the horse and the rider into the sea. Mm-hmm. Is that from the coast of Canaan or is that from the coast of the Delta of Egypt? It doesn't really matter.
Is that the Mediterranean Sea or is that the Red Sea?
It's the Red Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, yeah. So it's a story of liberation.
I mean, if you think about it, where did the Egyptians come from? They came from the Mediterranean. You think they came from Egypt, but no, how did they get there? They come up the coast to the ports at Jaffa, at Akko, at all these different ports, and they project power inward from these ports. Mm-hmm. So when you cast them out into the sea, you're casting them out into the Mediterranean. I mean, there are a lot of ways to sort of read the story, and the ambiguity is wonderful because it allows the story to be adapted and reread and reimagined in different generations.
Yeah, good question. It's a big topic and it's a lot of fun. Maybe we'll talk about it at some point at our Center for Jewish Studies. Yes.
I just wondered. There's a lot of seals.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any matrices of the seals ever found?
How do you mean matrix?
Well, the things that made the impression.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. The actual seals. We should call what he's finding and was citing as sealings or boule.
Yeah.
The seals themselves we have plenty of as well. Often in precious stones. Almost all of them are some kind of nice stone.
Yeah, I mean this
too.
is a seal. Like that's the actual seal, right?
Yeah, this is in the Egyptian period. Yeah.
And when I was talking about.
Too few of them have been found in context, which is a bummer. Many of them show up in illicit finds or in shops.
So here is a seal impression.
Right.
And there is an actual seal. This was excavated in the city of, both of them excavated in the city of David, or in the city of Jerusalem.
And for pure chance, I don't think we've ever had, do we have a seal and a bula corresponding?
We don't ever have a seal
I mean, that's the
and
needle
the
in
seal
the haystack,
impression, right? Where they've excavated.
The moon shot. for
Yeah,
archaeologists.
they've actually excavated the seal and the impression. Yeah, often you find the seals in tombs, so like they get buried with the owner, right?
And hence they're also looted easily and end up on the
Yeah.
antiquities markets. Lara Fabian.
I actually have a seal question that I wasn't gonna ask, but it works really well with this one, which is, this lachish material, what's up with putting the seals in a jar? Like, that's
Yeah,
weird.
Yeah,
And what does that tell us about sealing practice and what these things are actually doing? I mean, that's like a really
right. So just to repeat the question and give some context. Dr. Fabian is referring to the seals that came out of that jar. These are used up boule. That means they're sealings that have come off of something. What's the value of them thereafter? You don't know what thing they were attached to any longer. It could have been a jar. It could be a scroll. So what?
I mean, I probably would look at the two archaeologists here and say, your
That's
guess,
our
your guess
problem.
is better than mine. I see them probably as they were, the document with a seal probably was read, and then, now you have this like discarded seal, and then they've just taken all of them and put them in an old jar that's probably being discarded, but
One might
who knows?
offer the idea that, like blank tablets in Mesopotamia, that would be recycled. They were recycling them, and here you have the concern of misappropriation of an official image that could be maybe duplicated. I'm just fishing
it's
here.
just a super, I mean, like having looked at so much of the Hellenistic sealing material from other spaces, like I can't think of anything like this. Like, it's a very, very interesting.
At
beautiful
Megiddo, we
place.
also have Schumacher,
Jars.
Gottlieb Schumacher found late Philistine decorated ware, an interesting vessel.
Yeah.
And it's basically like a hoard of stamp seals
That are also
from probably the Iron II, yeah.
It's really, I mean, it would also be an interesting.
the seals are the seal impressions.
The impressions, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the
Wait,
impressions.
I'm not sure actually. It's Schumacher, so
They're probably
we
the
don't have good data about it.
We'll look into it.
It's
That's a really
Nine.
great question, Laura. Laura, yeah, that's just like really interesting.
Yeah, it's very suspicious.
This is why it's so great to have archaeologists, thinking about these things with, the epigrapher.
We have some fun conversations to cross our doors. Other questions? Yeah, Mark?
I have a question about the development of the language forms. Maybe if you could talk briefly about from cuneiform up to maybe what we would recognize now as Hebrew that we read in the Bible.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think you're alluding to the alphabetic cuneiform that I was showing. The earliest writing is Egyptian hieroglyphic and cuneiform writing in from Mesopotamia. We see that in the Amarna letters. It's the Akkadian cuneiform is essentially the lingua franca of the Middle East until the end of the New Kingdom period in Egypt. And then in the 12th century, you begin to have alphabetic text, an alphabetic text spread. But we know about alphabetic writing from, a number of inscriptions in Egypt, in Sinai, dating back to at least the beginning of the second millennium BC. So to around 1900, 2000.
1,000 years before the Phoenicians.
1,000 years before the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians did not invent the alphabet. I would say that I would credit the Phoenicians with spreading the alphabet. So I think the spread of the,
Standardizing.
they standardized and spread the alphabet, the 22-letter alphabet. There's all kinds of experimentation that's going on with alphabetic writing in the mid to late second millennium BC. Alphabetic cuneiform is one of them. And it's a lot more complicated than, people think. It's not, from Ugaritic, sort of the standard thing about alphabetic cuneiform. We begin to see it in Canaan in the south. Some of the letters in alphabetic cuneiform have the similar shapes as in cuneiform. You can see that they're making like a bet, which is the house sign in early alphabetic. They're doing it in cuneiform, stylistically. So there are a number of letters in the alphabetic cuneiform that show that alphabetic cuneiform is related to proto-alphabetic from Sinai and from Egypt and other things. Alphabetic cuneiform seems to disappear somewhere around the 12th, 11th century as Egyptian influence disappears, and as the Phoenicians take over, I think, as the main mercantile players of the early Iron Age and spread the alphabet. And the early Hebrews borrow the alphabet from the Phoenicians and adapt it into a local version of it.
Is this alphabetic cuneiform like we see in
No, this is Paleo Hebrew. So this is just Hebrew. This is just very, very typical Hebrew, but this right here is alphabetic cuneiform. And you can see, that unlike, if I go to the previous slide, this is cuneiform. You can see how complicated the writing system are. In cuneiform writing, there are 600 signs about, and they're syllabic or logographic. They're words or syllables. It's a very complicated, just like Middle Egyptian, it's a very complicated writing system. Alphabetic cuneiform, depends on which version of it is, had somewhere between 23 and 30 letters in it, which versions. In other words, it's very similar to Hebrew in the number of letters, and alphabetic cuneiform texts show striking similarities, especially to early biblical poetry. So you take the Song of Miriam or the Song of Deborah, and you see some of the language and poetic styles, and it looks a lot like early alphabetic cuneiform texts.
You mentioned limited evidence for the neo-Assyrian fort. I was wondering what that evidence consisted of.
So when we were opening in area C, and we were beginning to go down the hill, we could see strata. And at the site of Tell Shaddud, we have the New Kingdom, Late Bronze Age, well represented. And then we have the Iron 1, Iron 2A, well represented. We're not really sure about the transition yet. To me, there doesn't look like there's a gap. To me, it looks like relatively smooth. But then, after the destruction of Hazael, there's a gap in the site. There's no settlement in what we call the Iron 2B. And then we find evidence of the Iron 2C, which is the neo-Assyrian period when the Assyrians had come over and conquered the site. Or when the Assyrians had conquered the northern kingdom, and you can see that strata represented. And what I think is clear is when I was showing the forts, the succession of forts, what it looks like is that in the New Kingdom period, Middle Bronze, New Kingdom, Early Iron Age, the fort was the entire tell on top. And then in the Iron 2C, the site shrinks, like by maybe 20%, and that's the fringe where when we excavate, we go right into the Iron 2C. But when we're excavating along the fringe, you're seeing the strata, which from what we've seen so far is Iron 2C. Maybe there's some evidence of monumental stones and structures. We just haven't gotten into it, so we don't know. But the people that we had there were like, we had Aaron Meir there and other people. They're like, yes, this looks like you're going to get a neo-Assyrian fort. That's what it looks like. In our area, we don't see any of a Persian fort in that area. So we go from that area, we go from Roman to neo-Assyrian, maybe, and then go to the Iron 2A and the New Kingdom. But in our area B and in our area A, we have a lot of Persian. And I have a sneaking suspicion that the Persians shrunk the site even more, the fort even more. And then on the very top of the tell, we have a Mamluk / Crusader fort that we're trying to avoid. But it looks like that in the Mamluk Crusader period, they built another fort on top of that because it's such a strategic lookout and it's such a controlling site. But they didn't need a big fort; they just built a little sort of tiny fort on the top. So I think successive kingdoms built, when imperial powers were ruling the area, they used this as a fort, and otherwise, like in the Hellenistic period and in the early Bronze period, there's enormous settlement at the base of the Tell because there's a spring there, and so like if you don't need a fort, a military fort, then you settle at the base of the Tell. Where the spring is, and then you do the agriculture from the base of the Tell. I think if I were like thinking like long range, what do we do now? Future, I would say explore the agricultural development at the base of the Tell. But right now we're just like at the beginnings and interested in this transition period from the New Kingdom to the early Iron Age.
I'm going to
May
answer.
I ask a
Yeah,
question?
absolutely.
Your season coming up is 3.5 weeks this summer. Why so short? I thought it would be
4
longer.
weeks, isn't it 4 weeks?
July
12
12 to August 7th.
7th.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah,
4 weeks.
yeah, it's 4 weeks in the field.
Okay.
Professor Burke and other archaeologists will, it's so hard to process.
The ratio of time to
Process all
what
this.
you collect.
This is why I love archaeology, is because I'm just a consumer. I'm working there. I'm getting all the benefits, but I'm not processing all the material. But I can see the enormous quantities of material, and the amount of time and effort and finances it takes to do this.
Yeah.
And they can move a lot of dirt, and you can work in very selected places. I mean, I wanted to allude to a question or to something he said that could be taken completely incorrectly. And that was, he said they're avoiding the Mamluk up on top. They're not doing that for any reason except that it's not in their research questions.
Okay.
Leave it for somebody else. And if you get bogged down in excavating these things, you'll never get to the periods that you actually know
Yeah,
personally work.
we surveyed it, so we know there's a Mamluk/Crusader fort on the top. And we're also really not interested that much in the Jewish village of the Roman period, although it's really striking and interesting. And if we could find, let's say, an archaeologist who did that period, then and they had resources to put into it, then you would do that. If you had an Ottoman or Crusader archaeologist that was interested in it, and they had finances and resources, you could do it. I mean, I would probably say we kind of understand the Crusader Mamluk thing there. So I don't know how much archaeology is going to solve a research question. Whereas in the transition from the from the late Bronze to the Iron Age and the origins of early Israel in the land, that's a huge research question that's being debated, where this can address maybe directly to the problem. So you do try to not just excavate everything. You want to have a research question, and then devote your resources to the research questions.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, well, let me thank our